he was right. It's in the gallery. I don't know what all that means. It's a convoluted world, and really the only thing that you can have is you can barely have this is just how you survive in the studio. It's maybe it's an old-fashioned idea, but I don't. You're not in control of anything else. So I'm not sure what else I want to say about that.
And what am I supposed to address?
You're supposed to give your bio.
My bio. Let's see. Gosh, I survived the last 66 years, and that's all a dream, and I'm free to do whatever I want at this point. And there's almost nothing that I really feel that I need to do. And so sometimes work gets made, you know. Brad and Eva came over to the studio, and we just had an amazing conversation. It was just so beautiful. It was just magical. It was so powerful and exciting, you know. And I kept trying to talk the doom of it, and they just, the beauty just kept showing up. I was like, oh yeah, I like being an artist. And then this thing happened, like in a short amount of time. It had been percolating. And I guess I'll jump in to talk about the work, or just stay with the bio. Or
Just the bio for now.
just the bio. Okay, so that's the bio. I work in a kind of flow state, and yeah, with no expectations.
My name is Jeffrey Stuker. I'm also very happy to be here with you and meet these artists who I also admire in person for the first time. I've heard stories about each of you and seen your work around, and it's great to see it in person and to be here with you now. And thank you very much to Faye's Gallery for hosting us. I suppose I'm primarily a filmmaker. I make short films that are made to loop and be in some kind of a public or quasi-public space. And when I'm not doing that, or when the opportunity doesn't call for it, I'll try to condense that experience down into some form of still images that hopefully some of the interests or mania or narratives come across in some kind of shortened form. I think that's pretty much it about me.
Hey, my name's Inès, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm extremely nervous today. Also really feeling grateful to be in conversation with all of you. Tom actually was my professor in undergrad. Charles was my professor at UC Riverside, and Jeffrey and Jan are my two new friends, so yeah, I'm grateful. I've known Eva for a lot of years now, and yeah, felt like it was pretty special. You came to Riverside to see my thesis show with Brad, and you saw right through the work. It was no bullshit, and I'm grateful to have the piece here in the show.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm just going to get started then. Oh, okay. So my name is Tumlir. I'm a writer. I write about art. I write reviews. I write essays. I write books about art. Typically, the work that I get sort of comes from artists that I form a relationship with. And sometimes it's a long-lasting relationship. Jeffrey and I, for instance, have been working together on various projects for what? 4, 5, 6?
2000.
Many years. And so, you know, building projects out of relationships, I feel like that would sort of describe what I do. I really love the back and forth between language and visual art objects. I feel like they inform each other. It's not a one-way flow, especially when you enter into a kind of a dialogue with an artist that can actually be productive on both ends. And so yes, that's what my practice comes out of. So Ava put together this wonderful show, asked me to furnish what we're going to call it a press release, essay. It's rather short. I don't think I'm going to really get into that in any kind of detail. I do want to spend time actually allowing these artists to describe their own works, sort of one after another perhaps. But what Ava pointed out, that the thing that ties together the works in this show is their ostensible surface level dissimilarity. I do think that is perhaps something that I found very compelling, because in writing that piece, it sort of prompted a sort of need to look past how works appear, again, on the surface, and perhaps start digging into the works from the perspective of their operational processes. How do they work, and what do they work on? And there, I feel all kinds of associations can be made. And in fact, the associations seem to be, I would say that they are, in a way, kind of embellished by the fact that the works appear to be different. So, for instance, what's really nice to me about, let's say, the hanging of the show is that there's a dialogue between Charles Long's piece there and Jeffrey's piece over there, and they're actually put face to face. They're performing a kind of a face-off. What I wrote in the text is that, again, from the outside, they appear to be made very differently. As Charles says, he makes his work in a flow state, was the term that you used, and there's a lot of hands-on investment in the materials in the studio, and that is apparent everywhere in the work, right? There's literally the artist's fingerprints are on the material, as well as indexical marks of the tools that he used that sort of pass through the materials, and we get to see everything from this hyper-physicalized perspective. Over there with Jeffrey, on the other hand, we have a photographic work, which first of all, kind of distances us by the very nature of the medium, but then moreover, it's a work that is wholly made through a kind of digital process. That is to say that it's a very, in a sense, a kind of very hands-off process, because you're using a digital program, you're working at the computer. It would seem to be almost antithetical. But when they're placed in this kind of relationship, I feel like we're prompted to seek some kind of deeper kind of communication that could be happening between them. So that's one of the things I wanted to get to. I feel like the same things can be said for the other works in the show. Your piece and Tom LaDuke's painting, for instance, they also bear kind of quite interesting analogy if you want to draw it out. But sort of before getting into that, I do want to sort of let the artists describe what their work is, what it's made of, how it is made, what thoughts they had in their mind while they're making it. And maybe I'll start with Charles here.
Okay, so I'll try to be less vague than I was in the beginning. The title of the piece is Like Emanated Apparitions, and definitely ties into the show. But from a different tact, I would imagine. This, a few years ago, I always prompt myself with my own kinds of assignments, and I prompted myself, it's probably about 3.5 years ago, I said, what is sacred art? And so I began with that question, and I thought, well, that's a really bold thing to try to go do. I would say also, fast forward, I found out that there's no such thing, because all is sacred. But, to get there, what I had to sort of see was that if the art part of the sacred art was about the state that you're in when you're doing the work, that's the sacred part. And so, what I was studying, and I study and practice daily, is something that I was just talking with my old friend John Millay, who's here, who also shares an interest in this, is non-duality. And so there's a lot of time spent in dissolving what you know about your experience of, particularly of yourself and of your thoughts and of your consciousness. And so, that work of art is very different in how I would have made art, or I look at maybe at other people's art in a way. You look at it and you think, this is a thing, and then that thing embodies these things, and it's like, no, it's just more of the stuff. All of this is an emanated apparition. But now let me get specific. I said I was going to be less vague, and maybe later I can do my thought experiment. But I won't. I'll bump it off to everybody else, and then we'll come back and maybe do my thought experiment. But I'll tell you specifically about this piece is that so the two tablets, the way they came about, they weren't supposed to exist. I'd been working on a piece about that size, a little thicker, where I made the mold for the piece in reverse. So I had built up a kind of, a negative clay architecture that then I was going to brush in this gypsum with pigment and minerals. And so I did do that. It took me a long time to sort of do the whole thing. It's both quick and then, but just as an artist, just take forever, just like push it off, like always just waste all the time possible, and then just work in the last 10 minutes before you have to leave to go home. And that way you never are spent trying to do anything. You're just, it's spontaneous. That's how I've tricked myself, and a lot of artists do stuff like that. Like Guston would take all his fine new paper and just let it rot in the barn before he would draw on it. And it's like there's ways to get around preciousness. And so I made this piece, and I was working with my assistant Javier Quintero, who is one of my students at UCR, and he assisted me in that beautiful, strange, sort of holy year of making sacred art, or the beginning of it. I felt really like I had a disciple or something. It was so sweet. And we realized we weren't going to be able to release this heavy thing that we cast into the clay, that it had been so adhered to so much clay, and we couldn't lift it. And I said, we're going to make a tool. We took a piece of piano wire, we put sticks on the end, and we got on both sides. And so here's this big pile of clay and gypsum, and there's a gap between the table and the piece that's thick clay. And we saw, and we saw, and we saw, and we're going back and forth, and we're sweating, doing this thing. And then we're almost done, and we realize something amazing is being made while we're doing this. These two men, I'm 3 times his age, and we're doing this thing, and we both kind of realize it. And I said, something amazing is going to happen when we flip this out. And we flip it out and we look and we see it. And I said, forget the piece we've been working on, quick, take a mold of this. And so we took a mold of it, of both of those halves. And then those molds just sat around forever too. Nothing ever happened. Dust, 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 dust. And, but then I was getting into some thing that I had read that Aristotle said. And Aristotle was saying, and it keyed into how the studio was going, because what I was finding about what was making sacred art was flow state. Matisse said the thing in the studio is to be in the studio like it's a prayer, And so I read this thing Aristotle said. He said, there's 2 ways of going after things in the world that you want. There's the telic and the atelic. Telos means tool, and telic would be goal-oriented, and atelic still has the word goal, but it's removed with that A in front of it. And so for him, telic would be like, oh, I want to, have sex with that woman, and I'm going to achieve that. And then you go do that, and then and after a couple months, it wears off and you're kind of depressed. Well, but you got pregnant, and then you're raising a kid. And it's really hard, and you can't believe how stupid all this was. And you're thinking, this is not what I intended, I just wanted to get laid, and you're miserable. But then through working things out with this woman and the kid, you go, wow, I'm really learning a hell of a lot about how to be decent to these people and other people. And I'm really seeing the value in it. And then you start to be happy again, even though you're not sleeping and you're broke and you're not having sex again at all, But that's the
I like the story.
So that's the idyllic. And so in making these pieces, when we had the rubber molds, the two of them side by side, I had my assistants mix up different colors of metal, aluminum, with different pigments in them and stuff. And then I poured them. If you've ever tried to make a clown face pancake for a kid, where you pour the eyes in the mouth and then you pour the whole face, and then because the temperature is different, you see the face, and it's very cute. Well, that's kind of what happens there. So I'm making what's called a sigil, and a sigil is a magic symbol or glyph that when you're making it, you know that this exists. It's not something you wish for. It already exists. That's how you make a sigil. The Taoists were into it, and the various other people involved in magic did it. So if you look at those, one has some letters that say telic, and one has them that's atelic. And I inverted one of them because I liked the way that it made a swish. And they're the 10 Commandments of Charles Long's studio. And originally they were going to be a flapping kind of book, and the friend of mine who was so sweet and welded up the stand for it, his studio got flooded, and all that work got ruined, and I said, well, let's just take all these scraps and we'll put them on the back anyways. This is how the piece comes out. But working with the assistants, because now there are multiple, Javier's going off, and now I have two, and I had 3 at the time, and it's just like a love fest in there. Like we're just like exploring and doing, and it's just there's no one making the art. The art is just being made by itself, and I think an important aspect of this work that I realized afterwards, 2 things. One, I did in a recent 8-gram mushroom trip, I did realize I had succeeded in making something sacred, and I was very happy when I saw that. But the other thing is that I thought about this piece in a more sober moment, and I thought, wow, this is what I've been trying to do my whole life, is I've tried to make something that is not good because of what it means in any way, shape, or form. No one cares about the telic and atelic, who cares? But it's a piece that you are confronted with, and it's this constant enigma. And you don't have the sense that I'm trying to create an enigma, I hope. It's not like Knott's Berry's farm with the scary things they're doing right now or something. It's nothing like that. It's just like, that's a fucking thing. That's a thing that's taking up some space and looking at me, and it's super incomplete. And yet it's there. So, and there's nothing else there for you. There's no content. There's no message. You're not burdened to have to figure this damn thing out. And it's just like everything else that you're experiencing anyways. It's all yours to do what you want with. There's no overlay of ideology. So that's that. I hope it didn't take too long, and I hope there's time for my thought experiment.
Yeah, I don't want to burden your piece with meaning here, but I did think that it might have something to do with writing, or the origins of writing. And when you described it to me, you talked about the 2 slabs as being bookended, which is what kind of like book matched, which is what sort of planted the seed in my mind. And of course, this is a thing, as you're saying, but it's made of many things. Most notably, those 2 things, those 2 book-matched slabs, which to me potentially have something to do with writing, and you did actually write something into them. And again, so that's sort of what brings me to thinking about the possible relationship to Jeffrey's work, because you have the two slabs there, and then you've got these two photographs here. The photographs are also, to some extent, dealing with writing, and also this idea of the book matching or recto-verso relationship that we might have to a surface of some sort, right? So maybe I'll pass it off to you.
Yes, thanks, Jan. That was fascinating. Thanks for describing it. There does seem something inexhaustible about the work, you know, or goal-oriented, or some rejection of ends means rationality that I really like about this piece. But then it also has these figures, these moments of fascination. It's not just process. So I really responded to that, to your work in that way. The relationship to writing, I think that's fascinating, and even inscriptions on an aesthetic surface that maybe at first resists your sense making or your desire to make immediate sense of what you're looking at. So we are looking at, in these two pictures on the wall, we're looking at a famous piece of writing, or a piece of writing by a famous writer in its strangest possible form, in its most maybe thingly instantiation. And this is a papyrological fragment from a lost play by Sophocles, which is called Inachus, named after the river god, the Argive river, a minor figure in Greek mythology, circa 500 BC, known to Aristotle, mentioned in the Poetics. And this is a play that was thought lost for a good 2,500 years, so I was really interested in that. And a fragment of it was, I wouldn't say found, but it was accidentally discovered in an act of barbaric desecration of an Egyptian mummy found in Lower Egypt, in Tunis, in a necropolis that had since become a dome. And this mummy, which is only known as Mummy 15, was taken, and this is already a barbaric expression, taken back, as the Brits said in the 19th century, taken back to the University of Oxford and housed in a place called the Egypt Exploration Society. I think there's probably not a more colonial name for an institution than that, which is now housed as part of the Bodleian Library, which is named and then unnamed the Sackler Library of Classical Antiquity, for all the reasons, good and bad, that we know about. And this journey of this fragment of text, there's a few fragments of this play, is fascinating to me precisely because of this relationship, its purported relationship to the sacred, its collage-like integration into another religious practice, that of the making of a burial shroud. It serves oftentimes old and seemingly insignificant papyrological fragments were taken into Tunis and used as cartonnage, stuffing for a mummy. And instead of showing the Greek of Sophocles' scribe, I decided to show the vestigial remains of hieroglyphics from its Greek process. So this little bit of white on the tan of the old papyrus and the bit of red are paint, encaustic paint and gesso that faced anyone who saw the mummy upon its opening. And it's the eye of Horus is the main hieroglyphic that you can see, this eye that's looking back at you. So I was very excited and surprised to hear Charles talk about this work, look back at him in the studio. So writing is there. It's happening on in this case, the verso side, and it's been turned away from us. It's my minimum gesture of trying to make some sense of the barbaric act of generating this bit of culture, and then there's writing, smaller writing, inscribed both in the classificatory sticker on this piece of glass that houses, or that's supposed to protect the fragment, and then this hilarious, I mean absolutely cartoonish Disney version of colonial logo that is the actual logo of the Egypt Exploration Society, which contains not one but two representations of papyrus. One that's a living plant, and then supposedly the fragment that came from it. In that logo, we find this elision of the entire history that was a civilizational process, a process of suppression, and ultimately a colonial exploitation. All that is skipped in the name of a kind of seemingly neutral or natural iconography. So for me, that's one of the ways in which writing comes in and out of the work, and it also migrates somewhat fancifully onto the pencils and the marking equipment that's resting on the glass of it. So we find these other logos from other histories that, of course, in the last instance, are also connected to the colonial ones and their extraction methods and whatever else.
Just a point of interest, you came across this piece when we together went to the UK, and,
Yes.
and then, you know, perhaps by accident, you visited the museum. Obviously, you'd be interested in that, but came across this piece. And a point of interest, I hope I'm getting this right, but in that space, you're not allowed to photograph anything, right? So when it came to reconstruct this document, you did it on the basis of what?
Oh yes, thanks, Jan. The process there is an interesting and strange one, which is I went to this library. I did contact them in advance and said I'd be interested in anything I could find about this period of Sophocles, and if there really is these purported fragments from the lost Inachus play, any work that anybody's done on it, you know, someone who didn't come from the background of classics, I'd be very interested in understanding as much as I could. And they were very welcoming to me as a person, so I got to go in, and I was going to be in Oxford for most of the summer, over the summer, and I knew I had some time on my hands, but I thought I would be able to make photographs of this and do some work, maybe hopefully make a film about this archive. And I was immediately told no, and it was really, there was a real force to it, and more than force, there was this kind of thing that's wonderfully British, which is the offense that I could possibly think that would have been appropriate. So it wasn't no with a threat of violence or expulsion, it was the idea that I had committed a major faux pas by simply wanting to do this thing and asking about it as a possibility. And so that was interesting because I had hoped to do some work there. And the reason why it was so strict, one has to take off jackets, scarves, anything other than kind of a shirt and pants, the normal attire. You can't have any bags, any briefcases, anything. It's because the head of that department, not some scraggly person like you or me, the head of that department had sold millions of dollars of ancient manuscript papyrological fragments, including the only known oldest fragment of the Book of Mark from the Holy Bible, to the ghouls at the Hobby Lobby, who started the Museum of the Bible. And he made millions of dollars from this, and then got caught way too late, years and years later, and resigned in shame. So there was an amount of surveillance that was even for the UK very extreme for this place. So I think I came in an unlucky time, and I think it's much looser now. But at that moment, I really wanted to see this thing and make some kind of visual record of it. So they gave me a golf pencil and pieces of paper that were blue, because somehow that was more harder to hide or something like that, or confused with anything else. I also don't like the color blue, so that was a strange thing to work on that ground. And so I made drawings with next to the papyrological fragment, so they let me make essentially this situation where I got the paper nestled right up against it and made drawings. And I made a lot of drawings, so this is a fiction in the sense of what happened. And I used the drawing each night to reconstruct little bits of the actual papyrus in a 3D modeling tool. In this program, in this case, it's called ZBrush, which is really good for those kind of surface depths and painted textures. And I kept working on it, and then I kept working on it for about a year after I got back from Oxford, because it continued to look really stupid, and I was trying to find a way for it to not look really stupid. Very late, and embarrassingly late in the process, I remembered that windows, because they pass through the building, can be viewed from the outside. So my problem of figuring out what the shape and therefore the reflection of the window on that glass could be adjudicated by leaving the building and taking a photograph of it and then make measurements from that. So that was a crucial last minute realization, which I'm embarrassed about, because one should know these things. But I don't know, there's a part of that process that is also about immanence, about letting, as Charles was talking about, letting the work make itself. I knew it wasn't done, I knew it looked stupid, and I knew it was ill-advised, the whole venture. And I thought that I could make something that would be more satisfying eventually, so I just kept working. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, so, here again, I guess that's a sort of a paradox that, we're looking at these images, and once you know that they're digital renderings, you start to assume that they, in a sense, sort of come out of a program, straight out of the technological box, so to speak. But in fact, they are preceded by this laborious handwork. And here again is where I would find some kind of echo between your work and Charles's. These deeply sedimented documents of almost, the history of writing to some extent are being passed through your own hand, which seems significant. And maybe now kind of turning to Tom, I look at this work of yours, which is an earlier piece, right? This is from.
Years old, like,
it's from when?
2016.
2016. And here too, there seems to be a process of sorting through, in this case, perhaps your own history, or almost like an inventory of things that are and were interesting to you, that to some extent are being sort of in a way are being itemized, and at the same time made to add up to a kind of a new work in a sense. But there's many sort of historical layers to this work as well, and they're being passed, they're being sort of renegotiated in a sense by your own hand. And what I think is quite fascinating is, because it's painting, it's also allowing you to kind of attend to these different things that are, again, points of inspiration in your own kind of creative history, I'd say, in different ways, right? They receive different treatments. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit. But first of all, what's in that painting, and how does it sort of relate to you, and then how is it being sort of realized in the context of this work?
Thanks, Jan. I think some of the stupid stuff is my forte somehow. But the part that they don't see sort of right up front is the part that's smarter than I am, I think. And I try to. I couldn't tell a person how to do this, but I try to work sort of beyond my horizon. I was just talking to someone about this, but it's like if you know it too well, it's already done by you, and it's not going to be very interesting. But if you work in the territory where you can't quite reach or perceive the outcome, I think it's always better, or it is for me. And then some things are just like moments that you can't forget about. Like that's me there in the bottom third. As a 13-year-old, I had that sweater. It looked just like that. But it's sort of happy, but or like it's like I'm laughing or something, but it wasn't the best of times. But I guess either is the fact that Hitler owned the painting that it's referencing to. So I guess I start off with I try to not have anything that's arbitrary. So even the scale of the piece, it's out for Brockling's Isle of the Dead painting, and Hitler happened to own this particular one. I think it's kind of bizarre to know that like there's a history that exists, whether you like it or not. I mean, it's like it cheapens it because he was such an idiot, but it also heightens it because of the infamous quality in it. So, in any case, even if it wasn't owned by Hitler, I am often looking at art history, and I will fall in love with a piece, and I kind of fell in love with this Island of the Dead. It's quite mysteriously painted. There's 5 or 6 versions of it, and I really like this one. So that decides the scale of it as well, and it's actually the painting is reflected in that birthday balloon on the left there that's right in front of C-3PO's face. I don't know, what does that mean? It's kind of weird, but it was in my studio, and it seemed to be more than just a balloon. I lost most of its lift. It was for my kid's birthday, and that it was floating through there. It seemed to be the right thing to put in. It's awfully explained, but and the same sort of falling in love feeling happened when I saw Princess Leia for the first time. I think we all had that same feeling, but she appears in a hologram, and that was amazing to me. That was the first film I ever saw. I was late going to movies. I was 13 years old. That's the year that photo of me was made too, and it was the most amazing film. It's a pretty bad film. I hate to say that because the villagers like tortures when I say that, but it's a pretty bad movie. But also pretty wonderful because it was just made up of stuff. Like the actors had, the way it used to work is that they'd have a certain amount of time that they owed the studios. There were big studios, and so you get famous actors that were slightly outdated to perform. But it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's like he's expressing the wrong emotion when he's talking to Luke Skywalker in this one scene, but it's like nobody notices that. And like in the background, there's robots jump, but it's obviously a spray painted garbage cans. I love that stuff. That's kind of cool because they just made it happen. And I identify with that because if I get interested or excited about an idea, wild horses are not going to keep me from it. So it doesn't matter if it costs $1 million or $0. I will figure out a way to get it done. So that drive is in there. And so to make a motion picture, I would imagine it's incredible because you have to work with a lot of people. And I don't work with anybody because those reasons, but so I mean, life is full of little tragedies, I guess, and so there was a lot of them at this time period, and so like that ocean-y kind of area, it's a little scary to me, and it drops off into nothing, and it's all about masturbation and stuff like that too. The little death thing, as the French call it. And I'm not sure what else to say about the painting.
You name checked Star Wars.
Yeah.
Arnold Pocquelin's Isle of the Dead, and then this picture from probably a family snapshot of yourself, age 13.
Yeah.
All of these things are being conflated because they did intersect in time,
Right.
I'm assuming.
Right.
And but what I think is kind of remarkable about the painting, and this is what I noted in the statement for the show, is that scene that you're citing is the scene where Princess Leia appears between the two characters to either side of the frame.
Right.
And as you're saying, she appears as a hologram, and perhaps this is our first moment where we visualize this appearance of a three-dimensional image, a fully rounded picture.
Right.
And the way that you kind of address it in the space of the painting is through this kind of eruption of sort of free form,
Yeah.
painterly
It's funny to me.
action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny to me. I mean, it's actually funny to me that I use the screen from a screen door to paint the little squares of the hologram. So it's obviously not going to add it to hologram, but it used the same energy I was talking about to, like, with no budget you get something done, and also it can surprise you. And I think that mostly that's what I'm looking for too. Like I can be painting along and it rings a bell, and I think that's like the closest you can get to addressing the real, because as soon as you do, it's not anymore. I was talking to someone about this too, like being in the moment. People rave about that and being in the moment, but anytime you talk about it, you're not in the moment at all. It's like the last thing you are. So, and it's hard in a painting because you kind of know what you're doing a little bit. So you have to put all kinds of roadblocks up so that you can arrive at a place that you don't know. And that happens a lot. I guess that's what I mean by, like, it ends up using a lot of the stupid components on it, because I'm the stupid one. I can't quite see how that links, but I know that it does, because it rings a bell. And if I try to put together sort of more than that, then you can really kill a piece. Yeah. I mean, I think I love that the frame is photographed in this thing. I love that there's a frame. I love that there's a frame inside the image. I mean, I think that's like an amazing move. Yeah, I think it's really cool. And basically, that's what I'm trying to say here. I think, and so I really appreciate that piece. And then it was fun talking to you about The Shining for an hour. So, did you want to say
A
something?
good film.
It's a good film. That's a
It's a
good.
good film.
That's a good film.
All right.
Not a horror film.
Let's get that straight.
Can we talk about that for a few minutes? I'm just joking. Yeah, it's not a horror film.
So the hologram, this rounded image, this kind of like flat thing that has been drawn out and sort of inserted into full spatial depth, in a way, is perhaps, we could think of it as the ultimate sort of real fiction, right? Because once an image is sort of deposited in the world and starts speaking back to us, etc., we've entered that zone that, is part of the title of the show.
I think the most real part of that too is that she's not talking to anybody. I mean, she's recording it, hoping someone will see it.
Right.
But there's nobody, in her realm, nobody's seeing it. I love that part about that. That's really smart. That's a smart move, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's many ways to go with that, for sure. But I guess I was just trying to bring it back to, perhaps what's also going on with these two other works that we were considering, that they are, in a way, dealing with flat information. To some extent, if we accept that they have something to do with reading and writing, they're dealing with flatness, but then they're giving volume in a certain way to that flatness. And I'm so fascinated with this idea that Sophocles' play could have been wrapped around the head of a cadaver, fundamentally. So that's interesting. But this notion of sort of rounding out the image, I mean, that sort of brings me to your piece, and even what Tom just mentioned there, that like Princess Leia is not talking to anyone. It's pre-recorded verbiage, but we're experiencing it now. And so that sort of disconnect between our time and the time of a picture is still in play, right? Perhaps that's a jumping off point to talk about the space of the delay in your work in terms of like the time frames that we're dealing with as we're looking at it, our own time and the time of that work, but equally this notion of the rounded image, the wraparound image, which seems to me so sort of prevalent in our present day world, right? That we're kind of moving in the direction of either an image that is manifested as an entity of some sort, or an image that completely wraps around us.
Yeah, thank you, Noah. I guess I'll start by sort of describing a little bit what's happening with the piece. So you're looking at a 7-monitor installation. There's a smaller screen in the back that's called True Eyes. It's a 5-inch monitor. This one's called Main Character, and essentially they're both depicting the same video file. It's a 360 video file. Essentially, it's a sphere or a bubble that is filmed with, in my case, a 360 GoPro, tiny little stupid camera. That what's really strange about that technology, and it maybe relates to what you're saying, is that every time that the camera captures a 360 image or video, it erases itself. So there's a sort of scene that happens where when you look at the footage, you have a band, a blind spot. And I'm really interested in that because what it does is it kind of hollows you out, or the perspective out. So the perspective center point actually doesn't exist. And so it implies a sort of total vision that this video file has all the data, but of course the center point is not there. And so in this case, I've edited in the main character, this video is a part of that 360 footage. It's a band. In the smaller screen called True Eyes in the back, it's all of that data compressed into a flat circle. And I guess this sort of technological framing is something that I think about a lot. The perspective, the impossible perspective, in a way, the horizon line that is, it's not human perspective, traditionally speaking. And then thinking about it in time, this was a footage from the previous day of the install, and so in a way you're looking at a pastime kind of loop. This one I've sped up there's a sunrise and a sunset in it that I sort of added to think about a visual representation of a loop. And the smaller monitor doesn't have that. It's just a daylight loop, if that makes sense. Something else, I guess, I could elaborate on. I mean, in relation to the hologram and the holographic, that disconnect, the kind of uncanniness of that sort of image of everyone is looking at the image and it perceives nothing. But I think this is a little bit the same. You're not represented in the file or in the visual image. You're negated, the body's not there again. Yet it is looking out at you, but looking at no one. And so I definitely kind of see that connection. I was doing a lot of research when thinking about this piece on speculative cartography and how there's this whole kind of pushing back to the one perspective notion of map making and just perspective in general, and how the point of view being this sort of fictitious one, and thinking about what kind of new point of views or perspectives can we think of in order to make sense of this world we inhabit in. And so I don't know, there's this book called Terra Forma that really informed this piece, and it's essentially the proposition of having a lived-in perspective. And so instead of looking at terrain as an empty void, the kind of colonial impulse of being able to draw a land that's kind of blankly there, we have to consider the sort of soil and all all these other aspects that normally in cartography are sort of negated. And so a shift or perspective of kind of rethinking about the tools that we use to depict our world or surrounding, starting from map making. And so in a way I'm proposing a video. It's quite anticlimactic. Nothing really happens in it, although of course it's the artwork is there, and so that's definitely part of the interest of the piece, I guess. But yeah, I also think that monitors in this sort of scenario, we're kind of conditioned to bypass the monitor and look at the image that's inside, but you really have to work hard to bypass these curved monitors, in my opinion at least. And then when I do present, nothing happens in it. And so this kind of consideration of the device as a framing entity in relation to the body, I think I'm quite afraid of devices in a way. So I'm trying to think through that. Like, how do we make sense of ourselves in relation to these framing devices?
That's wonderful. I do think that a lot of, I think that this, this meditation on perspective and perhaps what will follow centuries of the so-called perspectival regime is something that we could think about through all the works on view. That there is that to some extent we are dealing in all of them with a shift in perspective. There's an attempt to either make a shift in perspective happen, or there's an attempt to adapt to a shift in perspective that is happening. But I wonder, I hope that wasn't too oblique as a statement, right? But I think Inez kind of sketched it out pretty nicely, that that the possibility that with our, let's say, our new visualizing technologies, we have to start thinking about a different way that we can confront a picture or enter a picture or even make a picture, right? And then this picture will no longer locate us as punctiform beings, which is the way Lacan puts it. We are not punctiform beings, right? We don't exist vis-a-vis a vanishing point. We are constantly roaming and scanning and this and that, right? So we have these tools that are becoming increasingly adapted to the scanning mode, as opposed to the mode of deep concentration. And to some extent, I feel we can make out either an attempt to sort of make that happen by your flow state process of a sort of a tactile relationship to the material, or in relationship perhaps to your particular relationship to these digital visualizing technologies, which again also has this sort of hand-on physical component, the very kind of physicalized kind of relationship to the holographic moment in Star Wars, right, where it leads to almost like this outburst of physical painting the paint, as opposed to technically using the paint to depict something else, and then this sort of coming to sharp resolution in your work, which is directly confronting this notion of perhaps a new perspective, a new regime that is post-perspective, let's say. But anyway, it's probably good to leave it at that point and open it up, see if people have questions or comments.
So just quick question for Inez. First of all, I think it's so interesting to think about how you perspective in 2024, whatever year we're in, and think about dating back to early Renaissance, a very contemporary different perspective, no pun intended, on it. But I had a couple questions. One is surveillance comes to mind, and we talked about lack of climax in the work. Would that be a deterrent for you if there was a climax? If someone came out of the doors and there was something dramatic that took place, is it important to you that it is a kind of generic lack of human body kind of dystopia?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's a great question. I think that, so I've had multiple versions of this filming. I have versions with people in it, putting the work up. And I'm kind of still grappling with it. This is my second iteration of the piece, which of course is always filmed on site for obvious reasons. I'm not opposed to having some kind of action happen in it. I just haven't really found the way yet to make that happen in a way that feels like, well, I guess it brings me to your first question about surveillance or argument is, there's something that happens, I think, when the eye registers that the footage is of the space you're in, and that there's maybe, it could be a split of a second, a moment, like, oh, am I being live recorded? Is this a live recording? Until I'm assuming relatively quickly there's an understanding that things are missing and things are not quite right. And so, yeah, I guess I'm not really answering your question other than I'm not opposed to it. I will say I've gotten some interesting comments about there's like, that it feels like something potentially bad is about to happen. There's something kind of, I like the tension of the pre-drama maybe, but yeah, it's not a finished piece in a way for me. I'm still kind of, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that question.
I was wondering if you'd talk about the title of this one, which is main character, right? I felt like, I don't know if it exactly transformed it for me, but I don't know, maybe it sharpened my thinking about the piece. So I was just curious why you called it the main character and what you think that contributes.
Yeah, thank you. Assuming everyone's sort of familiar with the language main character energy, which has become a very ubiquitous sort of saying to signify that someone might be, well, initially was sort of to point out that someone might be self-centered. Now it's being used as a kind of empowered position of having main character energy. I find this very interesting, this notion that being at the center of your own world is essentially a power position, that this kind of visual aspect of, yeah, being at the center, and that everyone else is a non-playable character or a secondary, has a secondary act that's so intense to me, that sort of language that we've assigned to feeling good or something. In relation to this piece, I would say, yeah, it's sort of a question maybe of like what's at the center, who's the, and of course there are no characters in it, the obvious, but that is the main character, the device and the monitor and the framing actually that creates and generates that positioning, like the illusion of being at the center of your own world, which I think is yeah, not possible in many ways. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, could you talk about the relationship of the titles of the work to film and Hollywood? Because one is True Lies, one is main character, so there's clearly referencing contempt of film. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Sandy. So part of the research that also led to this work, I was really interested in the Center Concepts Plan, which is a 1970 city planning endeavor that resulted with mixed results. But LA was supposed to go through this kind of planning where the very center of the city was the Bonaventure Hotel, which of course the Bonaventure has no center, which is great, but it's a financial decision to sort of direct money and through the city in this way, and the Bonaventure was sort of the fortress that could handle that sort of was a bank, it was a mall, it was a hotel, and all these things at once. And so what ended up happening is sort of the beautiful, exquisite decline of the Bonaventure Hotel, which is, I think, no decline, but has attracted so many movies to be filmed there, and True Lies was filmed at the Bonaventure Hotel. And it's the way it's filmed, it kind of, again, circles around these characters in an interesting way. So, yeah, a lot of the work I've been making has titles of Hollywood movies filmed at the Bonaventure Hotel. A little bit of a strange, maybe, reference point, but I appreciate your question, so I can actually talk about it.
Jeffrey, you, in these, I think you were talking that you were interested in the verso side of the papyrus. I'm wondering, can you say more about that? And this is the reconstruction that you've done is of the verso. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if you could say more about that. It's really interesting.
Sure, of course, thank
verso.
you. Well, I guess, I mean, in some sense, I think it's the recto, which is the Sophocles play, which leads to a set of thoughts, critical, I imagine, about what gets assigned recto and verso. In this case, is it the value assigned by temporal sequence, some kind of linear calendar time? This came first, therefore it's primary, therefore it's the correct side, recto, it's the face, and this came after, therefore it's verso, and it's the back. Very hard to describe in this context. So then it does seem to betray the arbitrariness of what's considered primary and secondary. Clearly at the moment that the Brits on their expedition took these fragments, they were privileging biblical Greek. And so in that collection, the prized object is this fragment of Mark that got sold to Hobby Lobby. So that would have been recto, and whatever, I'm sure there's something on the back. Oftentimes there were accounts of land leases because these pieces of writing material were themselves quite expensive and hard to come by. Every scrap would get used until it was obliterated. Most of the scraps in the archive are very small, about this size, and they're referred to by papyrologists as cornflakes. Even those are assigned a recto and verso side, though. So that archival impulse, that institutional drive to assign things a front and a back, a primary and secondary value, or a hieroglyphic versus hieratic Greek inscription, that was already interesting for me. Yeah, I went there, did the work, figured out what this play was about. It really was about King Inachus and his daughter who got transformed into a heifer. It's an incredible, possibly the most visual effects laden of Sophocles' plays. There's a number of relatively avant-garde maneuvers that are noted by the scribe in the margins. All of that was endlessly fascinating to me. Somehow coming back with it and showing that at the expense of the Egyptian seemed to duplicate a violence that was already at work and maybe is still very much at work in this civilizational process that we're caught up in now, and which we haven't, what's the very nice way, finished with. So that seemed like the way to go. The other thing that was of interest to me is that the works that are in the light box in the plinth also have a similar relationship between top side and underside, and it's called the ventral and the dorsal sides of this butterfly. The butterfly is named after Inachus of all people, and so the Neo-Latin name for this butterfly is Kalima Inachus, pretty Inachus, which is an insane name considering the history of the play to refer to the king himself as pretty. It seems to be a misunderstanding of Inachus and his daughter Io, who's much more beloved and notably beautiful character in Greek mythology. Or is it a name of the butterfly itself, which does have this purple royal livery that you see when it's the dorsal side of its wings spread out? You see it. I became really interested. It's one side of this butterfly is camouflage and almost, at least according to the entomologist, a perfect mimicry of a dead leaf. Then the inside doesn't look dead, but looks very much alive, whatever that would mean in this case, a simulation of beautiful lifelikeness. There, the dorsal and the ventral also seem relatively arbitrary. Which side is the Kalima part, and which side is the Inachus part? Which side is the king, and which side is his beautiful daughter? Which side is actually mimetic, and which side is something else? That's not entirely, I guess they totally depend upon one another. So something about the recto and the verso spatiality of this papyrus was interesting to me in relationship to that. I mean, I guess I have shown these works in different ways, in different configurations over the past few years, and something I'm trying to arrive at, if it's possible, in its material form, is how one could develop an intuitive relationship to that as a viewer, or how the work could say that at the level of its objecthood or its flesh. There is something I find exciting about the way that the frame duplicates what's happening. This paper tape, this temporary frame that's in the Papyrological Institute, and that does, in some ways, kind of tease us with the idea that the back you have access to somehow, or that what you're seeing in the picture is only temporarily turned away from you. But I suppose I'd have to make some kind of a moving picture or some other, a filmic object to get at that more intuitively, where you would see that and experience it. But it was certainly of interest, those front and back relations.
You're also really drawing attention to these mimicking insects, again, from the perspective of new imaging technologies, or at least you're kind of using a kind of analogy between what's going on there, which would be the most, kind of organic version of the wraparound image, right? And also the disappearance of the subject and or maker of the image into the image. You're drawing a kind of analogy between that and the program, to some extent, that you're using to produce that image.
Oh, definitely. And I suppose that maybe it's in that space of a particular or peculiar virtuality where the recto and the versal, the dorsal and the ventral, the front, the side, the orthogonal and the perspectival all become pretty much arbitrary. What you see first and what you give primary value to is really just simply at the expense, because we live in linear time, or we're experiencing our experience in linear time. We can only see the one side at a time. And I was excited by Inez talking about her video not in filmic terms, but as a file. And really we have a file that we're seeing in a non-perspectival space in the circular monitor as a kind of a jewel of videographic information, and then here as this impossible perspective as you described it, that excludes us as a body or as a co-observer. And I think that does point to this, maybe the two conversations point to a similar condition that we live in, where in the end these are presentations, temporary or transitory objects that relate to or come from a kind of data. Not that we want everything to simply be data, but in some sense that's part of the conditionality of experience and of the image now. And so finding ways in and out of that data to intervene or to show its orientation toward our bodies and our organization of perception by means of technology, that is something that an artist can do by means of an intervention.
Can I say something? I use maybe it's not similar, well, in the same realm. I use a Blender 3D, modeling thing. And what's amazing to me is that you can, let's say you're building a hand, whatever, you can it's just such a high resolution, and it's an entirety. You can move in virtual space. That the particle count comes close to reality, and so, but as in reality, you can kind of only, you have to trust that the front of my hand looks like the front of my hand, the back of the hand looks like the back of the hand, because that's all we see ever anyway. And so the distance between existing in a virtual world as the real world is becoming closer and closer all the time. It's a little scary, but pretty intriguing too, because I think you're right. What you mentioned before too about perspective changing. I mean, you think of the Flemish primitivists. I mean, objects absolutely real, like a camera existed, but they're in these really weird, condensed, compressed spaces and all. And I think it's because people saw it that way, and they just agreed, oh, that's what this looks like. And now we're agreeing that this looks like this, and that's going to disappear soon too, like when the hand turns around.
John. Charles, I have a question. You explained the flow state and this amazing experience in the studio with assistants, and the work was just manifesting through these processes, right? And it seemed like they were coming out of something that would be more, let's to use very lazy language, like the subconscious. Okay? But that there's this moment in time of the heart problem of consciousness kicks back in, and I see here a presentation that is very much like something I would imagine seeing at the Met of sacred art objects, right? There's these kind of aesthetic choices of the altarpiece. You didn't really talk about how you end up having to make these kind of hard decisions after you have all these extraordinary objects being made by your hand and through these material processes. But then there's this one point you have all this data, and then you have to organize it. Can you talk about how you had to come to some decision here of how to place things, how to sequence things?
Thanks, John. And this kind of goes along with something you and I were chatting about the other day. I think my life has moved more and will continue to move more into the direction of pure spontaneity. So in fact, nothing is difficult. I get it that it looks like an object. And I was even fascinated when it was done. I was like, oh, there's an invisible frame, and I thought, oh yeah, that helps it be an object, for people, so that it's somehow a thing in the world. But it's not a thing in the world. There are no things, and there is no world. And here's where I'd like to dare to try my little thought experiment. I really don't know where this is going. I saw Trump on TV 2 days ago, just singing Ave Maria for 30 minutes. And I think that's what's going to happen here, but I want to try it. And it does key into Inez's, what Inez was talking about with her piece, and the title of the piece, and what Tom was just talking about. And so maybe I'll, so a thought experiment, like for example, let me give you, if you've done these before, let's put on your virtual reality headset. This is just the example, the setup. You put on your virtual reality headset, and it's so attuned to your desires that whatever it is that you're thinking of, that comes up. And so you're immediately like, well, I'm gonna go back to the Eiffel Tower, and I'm gonna have lunch on the deck and caviar, and I'm gonna be with my beloved person who's dead, and you're gonna do these things. And you do these things, and you begin to realize like it's too boring, because everything you think of you can do. And so maybe you even start to do the difficult things, like you start to do the uncomfortable things, because those are sort of more interesting for a little bit. You set up some obstacles, and even that's sort of not so interesting. And then you look around at your little tool set that's on your hand for the controlling this, and you realize there's a button and it says surprise. And you go, oh yeah, that's what I was looking for. And to what you were saying about we can only go through linear time. You know, I think that that's one of the things that we begin to see in a thought experiment like that, which is that we're going through this thing in this linear time, and we can't see what's coming, and we sort of see what's in the past, but we don't really know that that actually even happened. We don't even know if everything didn't just start right now, and that all of that is just some implanted memory. So you find yourself needing to appreciate this way in which everything is this book that you could skip to read to the end of, but then you're like, then I will probably want to go back and read the beginning, so I might as well just read it straight through. And essentially, this seems to be, perhaps, what this hard problem of consciousness is, which is this getting familiar and comfortable with the uncomfortableness of not knowing and having to be in the world. And yesterday you said you don't believe in free will, and I was like, I neither believe in it nor not believe in it. I mean, I think that we have to keep using language to get away from language's dead ends. You know, it's like, free will, no free will, I'm not sure either of this matters. So now I'll try my little thought experiment. And I'm going to call it main character. And so close your eyes, and I want you to go through a little bit of your routine for going to bed. So whatever it is, if you're flossing or watching Colbert or whatever it is, and now you're in bed, and you're turning the light off and you're pulling the covers up, you're getting that pillow good, and that's pretty comfortable. Now you're there, and you're falling asleep, and you are dreaming that you're at Faye's gallery, and it's a little bit strange. Things aren't quite putting together the way they're supposed to be, but you know that there are all these people that are talking these strange things. They don't seem to have answers. They keep bringing up really weird questions. Like they talk about the work. They're obviously interested, but you can't quite figure out why they don't know what it is that's happening, what they're doing. And then one of the people is taking you on a thought experiment, and they say to you, hey, isn't it about time that you took this thing that's happening all the time, that is you being here again and again and again, you are always being here. Isn't it time you start looking at that? And this question of why, you're not somebody else? And what are those other people? I mean, you're dreaming, so in a dream maybe you're all those people, but in reality you can't actually understand what it is that you're seeing. They're all just photons. They're all just reflections off of surfaces. It's all some sort of construction playing on the inside of your mind, and even all your thoughts are that. All your thoughts are just some sort of temporary, non-stop verbiage going on in your head. And you can just slow down that, let go of those thoughts as thoughts, and let go of those images as images, and those ideas of other people. And maybe it's time to really start agreeing with this idea that maybe you thought when you were a kid, that it's just you. That's all there is. It's just you. You're the main character. There are no people. And you know that you'll never know that that's not true. You can't prove that that's not true. So you might as well just go, okay, so if it's just me, and I'm born at this particular time, and I used to think that there was this history, like ancient Egypt and British colonialism, and I thought that those things were a thing, but maybe those are just patterns, echoes, things that don't really happen. All there is this experience that I'm stuck having over and over again, and it's really time for me to face it. And it's just me making this whole gosh darn thing up, and I will treat everybody as if they exist. Why not? And they'll treat me as I exist. But it's really just playing out in my own head. And what difference does this make now that I think this? Well, the difference that it makes is that I may not have to be so invested in the idea that all this is so critically important, because I'm not going to know reality. So maybe I'm just going to float along with this. Sure, I'll stand up for what's right, and I'll pay my bills and stop at red lights and stuff. But I could also choose not to, and it's not really going to make that big a difference, then that there'll be those outcomes. So I guess I'm just agreeing to get on board with the greatest art project I've ever made, which is to investigate myself 24/7 for the rest of my existence, which may probably go on forever. I am the greatest art object ever in progress and never finished. And that's my thought experiment. And I made it up. I don't know what the hell that is.
All right, is that a good end point? I mean, what comes after that, right? Whatever it is, it's gonna seem suspect.
The alarm clock ringing?
Martinis.
Thank you, everyone.